is our final game of the night. It's called String of Pearls, and I'm going to start it. It's a story that I'm going to start with the first line of the story. Someone will jump up and do the last line of the story, and then we're going to have to connect the dots. Okay? Once upon a time, there was a tiny little flea named Mervyn.
And so they all lived happily ever after. Ralph the dog hated fleas. And so they lived happily ever after.
Mervyn and his 7 tiny little brothers lived on the tail of a very large white dog.
Once upon a time, there was a tiny little flea named Mervyn.
Mervyn and his 7 brothers lived on the tail of a very fluffy white dog.
Ralph the dog hated fleas. And they all lived happily ever after.
All the rainbows finally ended in a pot of gold.
Whenever Ralph the dog saw a flea, a rainbow came out of the sky.
Once upon a time, there was a tiny little flea named Mervyn.
Mervyn and his 7 tiny little brothers lived on the tail of a very big white fluffy dog.
Ralph the dog hated fleas.
Whenever Ralph saw a flea, a rainbow would come out of the sky.
And finally all the rainbows ended in a pot of gold.
And they all lived happily ever after.
The fluffy white dog's name was Ralph.
It was very strange that Ralph could see rainbows since he was colorblind.
Once upon a time, there was a tiny little flea named Mervyn.
Mervyn and his 7 tiny little brothers lived on the tail of a very large white fluffy dog.
The white fluffy dog's name was Ralph.
Ralph the dog hated fleas.
And every time he saw a flea, a rainbow would come out of the sky. It was very strange that Ralph saw rainbows since he was colorblind.
And in the end all the rainbows came together in a pot of gold.
And they all lived happily ever after.
Ralph was normally a really pretty happy dog.
What was yours? This was very strange because Ralph was colorblind. Which made it even more awesome that he could see rainbows.
Once upon a time, there was a tiny little flea named Mervyn.
Mervyn and his 7 tiny little brothers lived on the tail of a very large white fluffy dog.
The white fluffy dog's name was Ralph. Ralph was really normally quite a happy dog.
Ralph the dog hated fleas.
And every time he saw a flea, a rainbow would come out of the sky. Which was very strange that Ralph could see rainbows because he was colorblind. Which made it more awesome that he could see them.
Until the end when all the rainbows came together in a pot of gold.
And they all lived happily ever after.
Okay.
What is it, Audrey?
You want to hear it?
One more time.
Once upon a time, there was a tiny little flea named Mervyn.
Mervyn and his 7 tiny little brothers lived on the tail of a very large white fluffy dog.
The fluffy white dog's name was Ralph. Ralph was normally a really very happy dog.
Ralph hated fleas.
And every time he saw a flea, a rainbow would come out of the sky. Which is very strange since Ralph was colorblind. Which it made more awesome that he could see rainbows.
Until finally all the rainbows came together into a pot of gold.
And they all lived happily ever after. And the fleas jumped for joy.
Once upon a time, there was a tiny little flea named Mervyn.
Mervyn and his 7 tiny little brothers lived on the tail of a very large white fluffy dog.
The fluffy white dog's name was Ralph. Ralph was normally a really happy dog.
Ralph the dog hated fleas.
And every time he saw a flea, a rainbow would come out of the sky. Which is strange, since Ralph was colorblind. Which is awesome, because he could see the rainbows.
In the end, all the rainbows came together into a pot of gold.
And the fleas jumped for joy. And say it with me. And they all lived happily